Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one.
The introduction. It was a chilly winter evening in Greystone, a small town nestled in the Midwest. The air held a biting edge, with wisps of fog curling through the empty streets, carrying whispers of stories long buried, some forgotten. The moon, others too fresh, too painful to bear. The quiet creaked around the corners of homes like secrets waiting to divulge their truth. Nestled among the clapboard houses, the old Sinclair residence stood with an air of solemnity, its aged shutters framing darkened windows that had seen far too much. For over 50 years, the family had lived and thrived here, until that autumn night when everything changed. On September 18, 2022, the gray skies rumbled with a storm warning. But the tempest within the Sinclair home was one of unspeakable horror. At precisely 7:15 p.m., the police received a frantic call, the voice on the other end trembling, barely coherent. There was an accident. There was an accident, the caller gasped, the tension in the air palpable through the receiver. But as the officers arrived at the scene and stepped across the threshold, they quickly understood that this was no ordinary accident. In the dimly lit living room, sprawled on the plush carpet, lay Roger Sinclair, the patriarch of the family. His lifeless body was contorted unnaturally, surrounded by shards of glass that glinted ominously in the faint light. Half-empty glass of whiskey rested on the table, a simple, everyday item turned into an undeniable clue, whispering tales of pain, desperation, and betrayal. As the investigating officers cautiously roamed the space, the subtle scent of fear hung thick in the atmosphere. They knew they were about to unravel a twisted narrative, woven through years of family ties and hidden resentments. This was not just a simple case of tragedy, it was the beginning of a dark, complex journey that would uncover the sinister depths of human nature itself. The victim, Roger Sinclair, had been a fixture in Greystone, a man whose presence commanded authority and respect. He had built a thriving hardware business from the ground up, infusing the community with both opportunity and a hint of rivalry. But beneath the polished surface and amiable demeanor lay a complex man, one shaped by personal demons that often lurked in the shadows. Born to a modest family, Roger clawed his way through life, fueled by ambition and an incessant drive for. He had married his high school sweetheart, Linda, and together they painted an idyllic picture of domestic bliss, raising 2 children, Jake and Clara, who were the envy of neighbors. Yet, the more Roger climbed the social ladder, the more isolated he became, consumed by a fear of inadequate legacy. A relentless pressure drove him to drink, a vice that turned his nights into blurred memories. As investigators delved into Roger's life, they found that the edges of his perfect existence were frayed with complications. Friends described him as generous and likable, but among his closest associates, whispers hinted at his temper. He had a contentious streak that emerged at the slightest provocation, leaving a trail of estranged colleagues and family members. His children appeared caught in the crossfire of his rage and disappointment. Jake had walked away from the family business, opting for a rugged lifestyle that clashed with his father's expectation. Clara, the more studious of the two, earned a scholarship that took her away from Greystone into a new life she sought desperately, far from her father's shadow. Roger's friends painted contrasting portraits of the man, fond memories intermingled with the tension he created. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that Roger was both a beloved figure and a tyrant in his own home. This duality would prove to be a linchpin as the tragedy of that night unraveled before them, revealing the darker undercurrents that ran far deeper than any had anticipated. The crime scene. As the detectives entered the Sinclair living room, a chill gripped the atmosphere, stark in contrast to the familiar warmth of home. They instinctively moved with purpose. Their senses heightened. The flickering light from a soul lamp cast long shadows, adding to the sense of unease, as photographs on the walls portrayed happier moments, smiling faces, frozen in time, untouched by the chaos that unraveled that evening. Roger Sinclair lay sprawled on the ornate living room rug, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. A pool of crimson marred the fabric beneath him, glistening ominously. The initial assessment revealed multiple injuries, but the most alarming was a severe gash along the side of his forehead, likely result of a violent impact with the glass coffee table that lay shattered beside it. The shards of glass shimmered sharp and deadly, like the secrets waiting to be unearthed. First responders had arrived quickly, noting the glass scattered in a crescent arc around the body, as if it had burst outward from an unseen explosion of violence. Investigators took meticulous notes, carefully photographing every detail, transforming chaos into evidence. A whiskey tumbler sat abandoned atop the coffee table, its contents likely consumed long before the moment of tragedy. The air buzzed with the tension of a fresh crime scene. Officers filtered in and out, relaying information, securing the perimeter, while the forensic team meticulously collected evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, searched for any sign of forced entry, and scoured for anything that might illuminate the horrific scene playing out before them. Then there was the faint stain of what looked like dark fabric snagged on a protruding corner of the table, potentially a clue uniquely belonging to the assailant. Intuition struck the lead detective. This was a crime born of wrath, fueled by hidden resentments. The house did not merely hold remnants of a homicide. It vibrated with echoes of family discord, with every framed photo and battered piece of furniture telling stories of ambition, disappointment, and strife. As they collected their findings, the question on everyone's lips hung ominously in the air. Who could commit such a violent act against a man whose life, for better or worse, had been so intricately intertwined with those around? The answer, they would soon discover, would lay buried within the family's complex web of relationship. The early investigation. With the scene meticulously documented, the investigative team reconvened in the Sinclair kitchen, a space sunken into uneasy silence. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with tension, as detectives exchanged insights gathered from the unfolding chaos. Leading the group was Detective Weller, a seasoned investigator whose sharp instincts had earned her respect within the force. Let's start with the family, she suggested, surveying her colleagues, their expressions mirroring her own unease. We need to know who was here last, what was brewing back then. Each officer took out their notepads, ready to sift through the complex dynamics that had led up to Roger's demise. They reached out first to Linda Sinclair, Roger's wife, who had been in the home when the tragedy struck. She appeared at the police station like a specter, eyes red-rimmed and hollow, anxiety gripping her every feature. After a brief wait, they ushered her into an interrogation room that felt oppressive, the fluorescent lights buzzing above. Linda recounted the night in a shaky voice. We had a fight, she said, fists clenched as if trying to control the spiraling memories. Roger, he was drinking again. She paused, the hesitation hanging heavily. We argued about Jake. He didn't understand why our son wanted nothing to do with the business, why he had to leave. Her words tumbled forth, laden with a mix of anger and sorrow, despite the pain etched across her face. Something deeper flickered beneath her emotions. Was it guilt? The detectives exchanged glances, noting the way Linda glanced over her shoulder as if expecting someone to burst in, the air around her crackling with suppressed dread. They pressed Linda on her whereabouts that evening. I went up to bed, she answered defensively. I thought I could leave him to his drink. The cadence of her voice wavered, and Detective Weller leaned in closer, her intuition urging her to explore every detail. As they gathered more insight from Linda, the undercurrents of a fractured family history flickered in the air, casting shadows on the truth they desperately needed to uncover. With the conversation winding down, they turned their attention towards the children, Jake and Clara. Their absence from that night painted a picture that was still incomplete, and it was time to delve further into their complex relationship with their father. Who else might have been involved in the swirling chaos of that fateful night? The threads of the investigation began to intertwine, hinting at deeper motives within the fractured family tapestry. The dead ends. As the days passed following the Sinclair investigation's initial leap, the detectives found themselves mired in a labyrinth of complications, a web of half-truths and unfortunate reality. Evidence that had once seemed promising began to fizzle out under scrutiny, leaving a hollow sense of uncertainty in their wake. Detective Weller and her partner, Sergeant Mike Thompson, sifted through witness accounts, hoping to find something, anything, that would connect the dots leading to Roger's death. Their documentation of that fateful night was riddled with contradiction. While several neighbors reported hearing commotion, none had seen anything suspicious. The silence of the witnesses felt like a barrier, rendered even more suffocating by the crisp winter air. Listen to this, Thompson said, his brow furrowing as he scanned the statements again. Guy down the street said he heard yelling, but his wife insists he had fallen asleep before 10. The inconsistencies left them with a gnawing sense of frustration. They reached out to Jake and Clara, who had stood guard against approaching their father's ghosts, reticent to return to Greystone. When they finally agreed to meet, the detectives noticed the physical signs of stress the way. Jake's hands trembled ever so slightly, clenched tightly in his pockets, while Clara's barely contained ache echoed in her eyes, a testament to their shared in her eyes. A testament to turmoil. They gathered in a sterile conference room, the bright lights seemingly magnifying the weight of their grief. Still, their alibis offered little of substance. Both siblings claimed they had been elsewhere, separate from their father, yet the timelines didn't mesh neatly. Clara had been studying with friends in another town, and Jake insisted he was out exploring the nearby woods. I felt trapped, Jake had said, voice raw with suppressed emotion. I just needed to get away. However, the detectives began to sense a deeper reluctance within them, a hesitation to share their truth. With each question, the siblings glanced at one another, carefully curating the narratives they presented to the investigators. The lingering discomfort pressed closer. Was there something they weren't telling? With no tangible leads, the detectives reached an impasse. The questions morphed into a haunting echo, reverberating through the dimly lit precinct. Why would any of them want to harm Roger? Just as one lead fizzled, another would flicker into existence, only to sputter and die. In the days that followed, the frustration enveloped the lead investigators. They knew the answers were buried somewhere within the fractured family dynamic. But unlocking those truths proved to be a challenge steeped in shadows, elusive, and just out of reach. Each potential breakthrough led to another dead end. And as the winter days wore on, the sense of urgency grew heavy. Time was slipping away, and with it, the hope of finding the truth behind Roger Sinclair's tragic end. A break in the case. Just as the investigators were beginning to lose faith in a decisive breakthrough, a tip arrived that sent ripples of renewed energy through the precinct. It came in the form of an anonymous call, the voice on the other end distorted, carrying an electric sense of urgency. "You need to look into the basement," was all the caller said before abruptly hanging up, leaving the detectives with more questions than answers. Detective Weller and Sergeant Thompson exchanged a knowing glance. Could it be a prank? Thompson used a hint of skepticism threading through his tone. But the tension in the air was palpable, and Weller quickly dismissed his doubts. "No, we can't overlook this. It's worth a follow-up," she replied, heart pounding as they made their way to the Sinclair residence once more. His shadows clung closely, dark and consuming, as they descended into the depths of the modest two-story home. The basement door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into a dimly lit room. Moldy smells, mixed with the faint scent of musty wood, enveloped them as they descended. Flashlights cutting through the darkness. Beneath the sloped ceiling, remnants of an old workshop came into view. Dust-coated tools and supplies long abandoned whispered echoes of a life once lived in creativity. As they searched the remnants, their gaze fell upon a corner cluttered with boxes and items long since discarded. It was there, hidden among old paint cans, that they found a tattered journal. Bound in fraying leather, it was scarcely legible, but as Weller leafed through it, an unsettling sense of revelation washed over her. The journal belonged to Roger Sinclair himself, filled with his musings and ruminations about family and the fissures that had widened over the years. It detailed visions of his failures, frustrations with Jake for rejecting the legacy, and hints of tensions that burdened his marriage. Then, in the dim glow of the flashlight, a passage caught Weller's eye. A late-night entry bemoaning an argument with Linda. The pages bore witness to their explosive fights, his words fueled by anger and dread. But it was the entry dated just a week before his death that sent chills down her spine. "I fear losing them all. It's too much," it read. "I feel like I'm a burden. Is there still hope?" The chilling words, a scrawled notation punctuated the side of the page. "They'll never understand. I can't go on like this." The implications weighed heavily, as if Roger's fears had taken a life of their own, breeding discontent within the family. This journal had opened a new door, revealing the emotional turmoil driving Roger's life-y narrative. Echoing with Shred, Weller felt a growing urgency, knowing they were now standing at the intersection of Roger's pain and the motives that could ignite a violent outburst. With hearts pounding, they could feel the threads of the case tangling tighter. slowly leading them toward a confrontation of truths that might finally unravel the mystery of Roger Sinclair's death. The suspect, with the journal providing a wealth of insight into Roger Sinclair's turmoil, the detectives regrouped in the precinct to process the vital information. The atmosphere was charged, a sense of anticipation swirling around the small conference room as they pieced together the emerging narrative. "Look at this. Look at this," Weller said, tapping the passage she had highlighted from the journal on the table. Roger felt consumed by fear. It wasn't just the loss of his legacy, this was personal. Something was festering inside him. As her colleagues leaned in, she continued, "He was emotionally vulnerable in a way that might have pushed someone to their limits." Thompson shook his head. "But who benefits from his death? Linda has been emotionally entangled with him for years, despite their issues. Clara and Jake are away, trying to forge their own paths. It doesn't make sense, does it? Or maybe it does," Weller countered, her resolve hardening. "What, it was closer to home than we thought? Linda was the last to see him alive. While she may appear devastated, her desperation could have eclipsed her better judgment." Let's dig deeper into her relationship with Roger and the troubles they faced. But the detectives' instincts were tested further when they received a call from a former employee of Roger's hardware store. One who had walked away from the job only weeks before the incident. Casey Larkin, a young man with a troubled past, had volunteered to speak regarding his departure, claiming unsettling confrontations with Roger had riled the workplace atmosphere. Roger was a hard man to work for, Casey explained, visibly anxious, twisting his hands together. He had a way of belittling people who went against him. "I tried to make suggestions on improving sales, nothing major. But he wasn't had it. Sometimes he'd lash out at you for no reason." The detectives listened intently, noting the resentment bubbling just beneath Casey's surface. "Did you ever feel threatened by him?" Thompson pressed, hoping to peel back another layer shrouding the truth. "Threatened? No," Casey replied, shaking his head, "but other employees were scared of him. He was like he thought he needed to maintain control, and when I left, he told me I'd never work in this town again." The implication hung hauntingly in the air. Casey had motive, anger simmering just beneath his youthful facade. The detectives exchanged glances, a mix of intrigue and caution forming in their minds. It was enough to initiate further inquiry into his whereabouts on the night of the murder. "Where were you on the evening of September 18? Weller asked, her eyes focused intently on him. "Just hanging out with some friends, drinking," Casey replied, a hint of unease splashing across his face. "We were out in the woods by the old paw." As they delved deeper into Casey Larkin, a picture began to emerge of his struggles mingled with frustrations that placed him within striking distance of Roger's anger. The detectives were acutely aware that they might have finally found a suspect whose anger ran parallel to Roger's. As they delved into the months leading up to the murder, they prepared to confront Casey further and shine a light on the tangled web of resentments, motivations, and the ultimate explosion of violence that shattered the Sinclair family hides, so soaked of the energy and so terribly beneath the surface. The trial. As frost began to coat the windows of the Greystone courthouse, the atmosphere outside was a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions brewing within. The trial of Casey Larkin had drawn the community together, A collective breath held tightly as family, friends, and uneasy neighbors flocked into the packed courtroom. Justice hung in the balance, teetering delicately between the memories of the life lost and the darkness that had enveloped it. Inside the courtroom, the air felt taut, charged with tension. Casey, once a bright but troubled young man, sat at the defendant's table, his expression a mix of defiance and trepidation. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney with a powerful presence, stood before the jury, painting a vivid portrait of the events that had transpired that fateful night. The purpose was clear: to reveal how anger and resentment had transformed into tragedy when Roger Sinclair was brutally taken from his family. Roger Sinclair had many faults, the prosecutor began, pacing before the jury with a deliberate cadence, but nothing warranted the level of violence that night. Photos of Roger's lifeless body were displayed, images that no one in the room could forget. The whispered gasps reverberated through the attendees, a haunting reminder of the gruesome truth they were confronting. But the defense team wasn't idle. They greeted each piece of evidence with an equal measure of scrutiny and rebuttal, casting shadows on the prosecution's narrative. Wasn't it true? The defense attorney posited that Roger Sinclair himself was a volatile man. He had a history of arguments, of struggles within his own family. Are we to blame this young man for the destructive relationship between father and son? Witnesses were brought forth. Linda, Clara, and Jake took the stand, each grappling with their own pain as they recounted their fragmented memories. Linda's voice trembled as she recalled her last moments with Roger, her tear-stained visage serving as a painful reminder of lost futures. Clara and Jake mirrored her anguish, but also reflected their conflicted feelings toward Roger. It was evident they struggled to reconcile love with resentment. But it was Casey's testimony that gripped the courtroom with unyielding intensity. He spoke of the anger that festered after he left the hardware store, an anger he claimed had been sparked by Roger's abusive words. I never wanted to hurt him, he stated, tension glaring in his voice. But that night something snapped. The trial dragged on, the line between guilt and innocence becoming obscured through the weeks of fervent testimony. High as the jury deliberated, and the gray winter mornings broke into clear afternoons, filled with phones. As days turned into weeks, the tension within the courthouse built to an unbearable crescendo. Finally, the jury returned, the members' faces drawn and weary. The judge called the court to order, and the room fell silent as they read their verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Casey Larkin, guilty of second-degree murder. Gasps filled the air, emotion flooding over the assembled crowd. Linda Sinclair wept openly, her relief tinged with sorrow for the severity of the loss. As Casey was led away in handcuffs, he cast one last look over his shoulder, an expression of anguish that perhaps suggested a different narrative, hidden within the aftermath of violence. While the gavel crashed down, and the case came to a terse conclusion, the shadows of grief remained cast over the Sinclair family. Though the community may have felt a sense of closure, Roger's life had left an indelible mark, demonstrating just how fragile the threads of family could be, and the haunting question of whether true healing was ever possible amidst such deep-rooted wounds. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed the verdict, Greystone quietly mourned the aftermath of the trial. As the cold grip of winter eased into the more welcoming embrace of spring, flowers began to bloom around town. Yet the Sinclair family found it difficult to escape the shadows that seemed to blanket their lives. For them, the world felt irrevocably altered, as if the very fabric of their family had been torn apart. leaving jagged edges exposed to the cold winds of reality. Linda Sinclair returned to the remnants of her home, now a shell of what it had once been. The laughter of her children echoed hauntingly through the empty halls as she wandered through the rooms, trying to cling to memories that were slipping like sand through her fingers. She immersed herself in daily routines, cleaning, organizing, hoping that structure might restore a semblance of control to her fractured life. Nights were the hardest, those yawning silences filled with memories of arguments, and the shared joys that now felt like relics locked away in the past. Jake and Clara, too, grappled with their grief in different ways. Jake found himself drawn to the woods, spending hours aimlessly wandering the trees, almost as if seeking answers from the silence of Naturia, reluctant refuge, where he could confront his conflicted feelings about his father. Clara busied herself with studies, diving into her coursework with an intensity that consumed her, a strategy she employed to escape the tragedy of their family and the specter of her father's memory. Months passed and whispers began to fade. The narrative surrounding Roger's death became just another chapter in Greystone's history. Yet for Linda and her children, the wounds remained fresh. Friends offered support, but many avoided the truth, unsure how to navigate the waters of grief that felt turbulent and relentless. Conversation grew stilted as the memory of Roger lingered like an unwelcome guest at the table, creating a distance they could not easily bridge. One rainy afternoon, Linda found herself rifling through old family photographs, the corners of the images curling with age. As she flipped through moments of joy and countless family vacations, tears cascaded down her cheeks, a bittersweet mix of love. It was then she stumbled upon a photograph of Roger, holding Clara as a baby, a moment untouched by bitterness. The emotional turbulence that had governed her life began to shift. In that moment, Linda recognized that holding on to the anger and the pain would only continue to cloud the legacies they had shared. She decided to reach out to a local support group, hoping to find connection and shared experiences. The journey would be long, but facing their grief each step of the way felt like a small attempt to reclaim their lives. Several months later, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a planned community event. Inspired by Roger's legacy of service, Linda and her children decided to honor their family's past by organizing a neighborhood outreach program. They sought to create a platform for local families to connect, share stories of struggle and resilience, and build a stronger community bond. As they poured their energy into this initiative, they began to unearth newfound strengths within themselves, slowly reclaiming their identities apart from Roger's past. Jake and Clara felt a flicker of connection to each other again, moments of laughter breaking through the gray moments as they embraced the journey ahead. While the scars of the past would always remain, the Sinclair family stumbled forward with a quiet resilience, determined to navigate the shadows together. Change hadn't erased their loss, but with each neighbor reached and each story shared, they found a light burgeoning from the ashes of tragedy, an unexpected possibility that allowed them to forge their own path toward healing. The town of Greystone bore witness to their transformation, finding strength in the aftermath of loss, learning how the delicate threads of community could weave together even the most shattered of lives. Reflection. As the seasons changed in Greystone, the Sinclair family found themselves navigating the delicate process of reflection amid the quiet chaos of their lives. The outreach program, which had started as an attempt to honor their father and husband, gradually blossomed into something that illuminated new paths for healing. With each neighborhood meeting and open dialogue, They unearthed layers of grief and resilience, warm smiles, gifted through shared solidarity, and moments of vulnerability born from brokenness, where perhaps once walls had stood high. Linda stood amidst the gathering as the warmth of summer filled the air, listening intently to families sharing their own struggles. They spoke of loss, betrayal, and heartache, each revelation echoing with a familiar resonance that reminded her of past wounds. Yet, as stories intermingled with laughter and connection, those wounds transformed into a tapestry woven together with strength and hope. For the first time since the tragedy, Linda felt a quiet acceptance settle over her, a recognition that healing didn't require forgetting the past. It required an acknowledgement of the pain while still finding the courage to move forward. She glanced over to where Jake and Clara mingled with the other children, laughter punctuating the air, and her heart swelled with pride.